It's time for the quarterly dusting.
Wait, you only dust every quarter? I've certainly never drugged my computer into the PC World office to shoot a video and then put it up on the table. And Adam went, "What the hell is wrong with your computer?"
and then suddenly you were shooting a very different kind of video.
Look, I was having some crashing problems. It wasn't the dust's fault, but I figured I should leave it there just in case. But I have to dust way more than once. Before I moved to California, I'd never lived someplace with hardwood, and I'd never lived someplace that has that doesn't have central air, that has some sort of centralized filter that sucks a bunch of dust and particulate out of your air.
Oh, that's why it's so damn dusty around here.
Yeah, dude. Well, plus we live places where there's a lot of cars. So like urban places are dustier because of all the car soot, which is, I'm sure, great for us too.
And we live close to the water. I don't know if that air circulation would make it more or less dusty.
Well, the fog, it turns out, picks up a lot of particulate. And then when the fog lands on things and condenses it, that's mostly outside though.
That's an ugly word, particulate.
Particulate's bad, it turns out, usually.
Yeah, I don't like it. Also, really says everything about why you and I do this podcast, that when I talked about dusting quarterly, you went straight to computers. You didn't even...
Oh, I knew it.
Didn't even pause to consider I was talking about household
You
work.
can't... I've lived here for long enough to know, and I know you well enough to know that there's no way you only dust your apartment once a quarter.
No, I cannot stand it. Ideally once a week.
Yeah, it is one of the great things about having kids is that now that's the kid's job. She has to go around and dust stuff. So that means all the okay, so the thing that became clear with this new regime is that we're three different heights, right? Like I'm tall, my wife's the mid-size, and my daughter's the short one. And all anybody ever dusts is stuff at their eye level and below.
Sure. The internationally recognized standard for dusting.
Yeah. So like when you look at the top shelf in our dining, we have those shelves up against the dining room wall. There's like some stuff up at the top. It's not good up there. I have to get up there on the step ladder and get in that.
I get it. Even I have a bit of an out of sight, out of mind rule about dusting. The top of the microwave, which is on a shelving unit, doesn't get dusted very often, let's say.
Our microwave is above the stove. It's one of those ones that hangs up on the wall above the stove. And it is a real double whammy of horrors because it gets like grease splatter from the stove, from the range top. Like the smoky grease that just sticks and gets on cabinets and stuff.
Sticky, greasy dust. Just ugh.
Yeah. Then the dust gets in there and it's like a horrible amalgam of anyway. So as the person who invented, I believe, hey, if you take a Swiffer and tape it over the fan and takes on your computer, the inside of your case will be a lot less dusty. Maybe 20 years ago now.
Wait.
Yes.
Did you actually propagate that idea at a time when nobody else was saying that?
I put that in a magazine and it became very popular.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Swiffers came out. They just introduced Swiffers. I was like, oh shit. Yeah. This, because I had been using dryer filters before that, but they're not as good. The Swiffer is incredible for pulling dust out of the air. The modern cases have fans and filters and the whole thing. Yeah. It's less of an issue. But back then,
this was built-in filter on your fan intake.
This would have been in an early 2000s Maximum PC, maybe even a late 90s one when I was still a freelancer. I put it in the doctor column, if I recall. I haven't done the science. I don't know that was the first recommendation for that, but it was the first time I had ever heard of it. And I came up with it, and people at the office were like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I put it there, and then the dust doesn't go in the computer." And they were like, "Wait, what?"
Even with modern filters, still a little bit of dust in there.
Use a little bit better Swiffer. So how's your dusting going? Is I guess the question.
It's been okay. Let's say the NAS has been running continuously since September.
Yeah,
without being touched.
I bet that's pretty nasty.
Probably.
Did you dust it?
Oh, well, I'm going to pull it out. Oh, dude.
Oh,
getting that thing out is a production.
Oh, is it like wedged in the corner between your desk and the shelves or something?
It is wedged as tightly into a tiny space that is exactly the size of that full ATX case as humanly possible. And I have to move this full upright keyboard out of the way. I have to move furniture to get the NAS out.
I once upon a time, I had a computer. There was a period of time when people were making, I think Zalman maybe made a case that had two cases in one big square. And you could put one computer on one side, one computer on the other. I was like, I'm going to put my server in one side. I'm going to put my desktop in the other. And then it's just one big case. And I had that for about 45 minutes because once I built everything up in there and I put it back in the corner and I was like, oh crap, I didn't get a cable and I had to take it all the way back out. Yeah. And it weighed about 80 pounds.
Oh, it's a nightmare. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, no, I took it back to the office and went back to my old cases as soon as I pulled it out from back in the wall.
Yeah.
Feel your pain.
Yeah. It's always the trade-off: hiding things, making them tidy versus maintenance. It's like the more tidy it is, the harder to maintain.
So I'll say I bought that plug-in canned air thing, like the plug-in blower, and it's been maybe the best thing I've ever bought.
Oh, it's great.
Because when I go out, when like my vacuum filter is clogged up and crappy, I just go out in the backyard, put on a breath mask and let it rip. Just blow that thing out.
Those things are so boringly great that like it's made discussing the actual dusting very mundane, because what is there to say? I take the cases out on the back porch now and blow them out for 10 minutes, and that's all there is to discuss.
Mine has a light on the front, which I quite like.
Ooh,
that was a good, I didn't mean to buy that, but I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
I also have to say, we got a new vacuum cleaner this year because our old vacuum cleaner, the battery was dead in. It also has a light, speaking of dust. And when you're vacuuming the hardwood floors and there's the low level light shining, you can see everything.
Oh no.
It's really good.
There's about a 10-minute window every day, late in the day, when the sunlight hits just the right angle that you can see all of the hair and dust and crud on the hardwood. And it's like, better off not knowing.
Well, I like to use the light so that the dust sees what's coming before I destroy it. It gets sucked up in there and then, it's gone. Anyway,
it's the promise of modern technology. Strike fear in the heart of dust.
I was going to say my vacuum is a transformer.
Okay.
It's a 3-way Miele, and it can be like a handheld dustbuster dealie. Like that's pretty standard if you're used to your Dyson stick vacs or whatever. But you also can jam the heavy part down into the beater and it'll sit up vertically and just stand. It doesn't have to be hung from the wall or anything. Or you can put the heavy part on the end and have it be like a normal stick vac.
So it's a triple changer is what you're saying?
Yeah, it's like a third gen transformer. It's like, it's not like you can buy 4 others and make a super duper big vacuum, but you can transform it 3 ways.
Now I'm picturing the devastator of vacuum cleaners, and we should probably just start this podcast.
Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad. I am not going to be able to let go of the image of a Gestalt vacuum cleaner contraption.
I want nothing more. Yeah.
A very long time. In fact, could we just do that with all household electronics? Could we just buy 5 of them and plug them in the right way and they become a giant robot?
There's so many ways that could go bad though. I want the Predacon. I like the Constructicon. The Devastator was pretty good, but the Predacon, that was big and orange. It was a chonky boy.
Was that the
I think they were like no those were Insecticons. The Predacons were like, it was like a rhinoceros and a panther, I think.
Sure.
I can't remember the other ones. Maybe an elephant.
I believe that.
Several animals that I did not think of as murderous, and then a couple of giant cats, which clearly were murderous.
Anything can be murderous if you're enough of an evil robot.
The Insecticons were solid though. What are we talking about this week, Brad? What do we got on the podcast?
On the docket this week, a two-fer.
Oh, I love a two-fer.
I think is how you would put it.
I do like a two-fer.
We've been ongoing brainstorming around show topics, show formats, stuff like that. As we said before, we like the topic episodes.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of topics that we'll kick around. In fact, I kind of wish we had a list of every time we've done this over the last almost 5 years.
Yeah, there's a lot that we get to and we're like, oh, this isn't, we can't do a full 45 minutes or an hour on this.
Yeah. The number of times we've kind of had a topic that's like, man, that would be a good 15, 20, 30 minutes, maybe, but that's not going to support a whole episode.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So we have 2 today.
Yeah. I think we might start doing a little bit more of this kind of like split episode, like two topics of that nature that can be discussed pretty thoroughly in like 20 minutes.
So this week I've been making a new benchmark, working on a project for PC World, and one of the things that we're working on is performance for game developers. So things that you use a computer for that take a lot of time. As I was working on this, it made me realize that building benchmarks, in the past, when I built a benchmark, it's usually taken something that's found, like a video game, and then figuring out how to make a repeatable benchmark out of that. In this case, I'm actually setting up the environment and stuff like that I want to test. And it made me realize it's kind of an inherently political experience. We'll talk about it.
Interesting. It's not the term I was expecting to hear, but I'm curious to hear more. And then we're going to do kind of an update on Matter and Thread, the nascent kind of universal home automation standard. Long
time listeners should get out their printout of the Garnet Trough of Despair. What is it? I can't remember what that's called now. I can't believe I'm blanking.
Trough of Despair, I believe.
Well, the Trough of Despair is where we're at, but they call the product hype cycle.
Oh, the Gartner
product hype cycle. Yeah.
Yes, that one.
Yeah, I'm going to point at the Trough of Despair as we talk about this.
Yes.
But it's going to be okay. Don't worry.
Yeah, we talked about home automation off and on this podcast. And I think it was the FOSS-Pod with Paulus from Home Assistant where we really kind of went somewhat in depth on Thread and Matter, which is supposed to like unify all of the warring kingdoms of different home automation standards.
I mean, I would say that there's probably an XKCD for this particular example.
That will be referenced later, yes.
Yeah.
But I've been thinking about home automation stuff again as like some of my Wi-Fi and smart plugs are not the best.
Oh,
and I've kind of always felt a little irresponsible about not putting all of those on a VLAN anyway. And I've been thinking, like, what if I just got out of the Wi-Fi automation game and looked at Thread and Matter, or maybe Zigbee and Z-Wave, the older standard? Anyway,
Brad.
I've done a little reading on how Thread and Matter have shaped up, or rather have not shaped up.
You sweet summer child. Yeah. So anyway, let's get into it. Do you want to talk about benchmarking first and then get to okay?
Yeah, because that sounds super interesting to me because like it's such an underserved market. Like how many benchmarks are being done for game development practices out there? Everything, like you said, everything is Cinebench or like video games.
Well, yeah, I mean, so Puget does Puget Bench has a bunch of like workflow tasks that are common for workstation users. It's really good. But not a whole lot of like Unreal compiles, partly because in order to get a realistic benchmark, you need something that's probably a proprietary asset. And honestly, getting Unreal up and working in a way that it will build a level is fairly time consuming. So I looked at UE 5.3 and said, hey, if we just take one of the default games that they ship and then jam some landscape and geo in there, that's stuff that we buy assets from the store, then, we can make something that is representative, but doesn't take, 14 hours. So I've been working on this. It's one of the things I've been working on when we're not doing on camera stuff at PC World over the last few weeks. And I shipped the first version of it to some testers this week. But as I was doing the final, so just to understand what we're talking about, when you ship a level in Unreal, at least, depending on what lighting choices and stuff you use, there's a whole series of things that have to be built. Like the nav mesh has to be built, and there's a bunch of computational stuff that has to happen, and the lighting bakes have to happen if you're using pre-computed lighting, and your LODs for the foliage have to be baked in, and LODs for everything have to be baked in. And you can basically hit a button in Unreal after you've opened up that level that says build all levels, and then start a stopwatch and time how long that takes to run. And if you're on a production game, like on the game that I worked on, the Anacrusis, it's an indie game made by like 20 people at most. So it was for a GPU light bake on that, it was like 20 to 40 minutes, depending on the level. If we're doing the same thing on the CPU light bake, it would take a few hours probably for each level.
Yikes. On what kind of CPU are we talking?
Anything for 13900K.
Oh, even a very good one.
Even a very good one.
I apologize. I'll probably do this repeatedly. I'm going to ask you to define a couple of things as we go, or elaborate on things. What is the nav mesh used for? I mean, it's not navigation mesh. Is that for like pathing for AI? Yeah.
So it's the thing that tells basically I'm not the person to ask about this, but I'll give an answer and people will yell at me in chat when I'm wrong, or in comments when I'm wrong. But it's the underlying piece of Unreal's technology that helps the AI path from node to node throughout the game. So basically it looks at all of the places that you've marked as navigable in the game and all the places you've said, hey, you can't go here, and then connects them all to each other as best that it can. And if it doesn't find ways for them to connect, it'll throw flags, and you can literally hit P, I think, in Unreal, and it'll turn the floor green where the AI can traverse. There's most people build stuff on top of it. Like we built, if the Anacrusis, we built a whole context layer on top of that told the AI like what was like how to find it fed more information to the AI that was needed for the game to work. But
Sure.
first you do the nav mesh and then you do the other stuff on top of that.
That makes sense. The other thing I was going to ask, you kind of kicked this off saying that you basically started with, I think the way you put it was one of the default games that they ship or that UE ships. Like, can you like what does a quote unquote game encompass in that context? Is it just a camera perspective and set of basic mechanics, or like is there geometry that goes or assets that go with that? Like, what do you mean by game in the context of like an Unreal project?
So basically UE ships with, depending on the version, you have a bunch of different default projects. There are some UE5 ships with some that are like architecture and live film generation projects. There's several game templates, like a shooter. There's shooter.exe, which is a first or third person shooter. There's a third person shooter. Actually, shooter.exe is a first person shooter. There's a third person shooter template. There's a racing game template, I think. Okay. And basically it ships. It means that there's a camera. There's some sort of the blueprints that set up the basic menus in the first level of the game or second level of the game. There'll be like gun mechanics. In the case of the first person shooter, it has like enemy meshes, player mesh, but then it also has like the first person arms that you use to hold the gun and stuff like that, and animations to basically get that going. So think of it as a tutorial. So basically they have a lot of documentation that's like, okay, first you're going to start with shooter.exe and you're going to go to this part of the project and do this and this and this. And then you're going to open up this in blueprints and you're going to do this and this and this. Okay. And it's a jumping off. Like, I don't know that everybody does this. A lot of people start with, say, shooter.exe. So you're using the same basic skeleton and rigs for your player characters and your bipedal humanoid characters, because then you can more easily use assets off the store and stuff like that. There are a lot of assets that use those same rigs and skeletons. So there's real benefit to starting with that, is my understanding.
That all makes sense. Do you have any idea how much you would have to differentiate from the default project before you can ship it per the terms of service or whatever? I assume you can't literally just... I mean, I think it would be kind of funny if somebody did just ship the default product.
So, I mean, I'm sure you can. The default project, usually they don't compile out of the box.
Okay.
You have to, but like when you go through the whole project, the whole tutorial series, it's usually like 20 hours long or 30 hours long. You'll end up with something that you can run in an exe on your desktop. I don't think they would care. I don't know why anybody would do that. It seems like kind of a waste of time.
Of course it would. It's not going to be financially lucrative. Again, I think it would just kind of like funny meta commentary.
Well, but like just to like the levels are like, it's like a basketball gymnasium size room with no roof and no wall, like gray box walls, gray box floors. There's like a couple of physics objects. There's a ramp and a thing you can stand on, and then like a couple of pillars and some spawners that just spit out enemies. So it's like, it's not super exciting stuff, but it is really nice because it turns out when you're starting a project from scratch, if you haven't done that before, just getting the project up and running is pretty hard. It's a challenging endeavor. So starting with that bypasses a lot of that stuff and lets you learn about like menus when you need to learn about menus instead of menus as the very first thing you learn.
Sure.
So anyway, so I started with that. The shooter.exe one has a couple of levels that it ships. I took one of those levels and then imported a big giant landscape mesh and put a bunch of foliage on it. And I'm going to put down, I gotta put down some buildings and stuff like that with more pre-computed lighting. So it's a little more representative. And then I said, hey, calculate the light mass inside this volume. And here's the nav mesh volume. And here's the physics, here's the different areas that we need to care about, and hit build all to see what happened. And it worked. And then I started changing the amount of foliage. I started changing the amount of pre-computed lights. I started changing the amount of geo in the world to see what it did to the benchmark, and got to a place that it was interesting and working. And then I realized that I could change how long it takes to run the benchmark by changing the size of the light mass volume, the area that it cares about getting good lighting for. And it's interesting because this process, the setup process isn't super threaded. So it favors high clock speed, low core count CPUs. And if you make the area that the light bake happens in small enough and not complex enough, then that means you're going to have a benchmark. Like I could make this benchmark very easily favor, say, a quad core that runs at higher clock speeds than, say, a Threadripper that's going to, in practice, be a much better representation of this benchmark. And I started thinking about it. I was like, everything that you're creating content, like if you're making a Premiere benchmark, the filters that you choose to run, the transitions that you choose to use, all of that, whether it hits GPU or CPU, are inherently political choices. And it determines, like, it would be easy to make it's, and I'm not suggesting anybody's doing this, because I don't think anybody that's actually working in these spaces does do this, but it requires a level of thoughtfulness that I hadn't really considered before.
Yeah, and thoughtfulness into what can be a bit of a black box. Like you see the same thing with like rendering out a video project, for example, right? Because like you're not only rendering like with a video codec or compressing with a video codec, you're also compressing audio. You're also doing compositing of different elements together, and all of those things are using different elements of the hardware and different software routines and algorithms. And, you know, some of those, like you said, same thing there. Some of those things might be heavily threaded. The audio encode might be single. In fact, most audio encoders that I've seen are single threaded. You know, that same thing where you kind of have to sit there and watch activity across different cores as you're doing things to even get a sense of like where the bottlenecks are and how to design around that. Yeah.
So what ended up happening was I was loading up Task Manager and Process Manager while the Unreal Engine, while this was running, and watching what was happening when. And then I started thinking about, okay, I need to, like, because realistically, if you're doing a production game, the setup period is going to be a small fraction of the actual light mass. Like the light mass calculation stuff is going to be the vast majority of your time on this benchmark, even if you're using the GPU light mass stuff, which is another political choice because it's skewing in favor of people who have big giant GPUs with such and such. It's also saying that anybody who has a GPU that has less than, I think, 12 or 16 gigs of memory just can't run the benchmark, or we have to use one of the third-party light mass calculations, which does support lower GPU RAM configurations. So it's a series of really, like, it's an interesting series of choices. I don't know that I don't know that we're going to make this public. I don't know that I'd have to look at what I've agreed to license wise to see if we even can. It's a fair pain in the ass to set up and get running.
Okay, that's one of my questions was going to be how portable this is, because the nature of benchmarking in this setting is you have to put it on a bunch of different machines, right?
Yeah. So that part isn't too bad. I intentionally built it without requiring any third-party UE plugins, which is important. And I used mostly stuff that I had licensed to from let's see, the UE store, the Quixel Bridge, stuff like that. So it's like, it should be, I think from a content perspective, I'm allowed to distribute it. I think shooter.exe is distributable because most, like I said, a lot of people base their like, that's the starting point for a lot of first person shooters that use Unreal. It's one of the reasons that like Unreal Engine games often feel like they have kind of samey physics, is because people start with, like, why reinvent when you start with a blank game, you're starting with no physics and no gravity and no collision and none of that stuff. And starting with that stuff turned on is incredibly helpful. So
sure. I didn't realize there were like third party what's the term, renderers engines for calculating light maps and stuff like that. I didn't realize components like that were pluggable in the Unreal Engine. You know, like I'd assumed that there was one way to bake light maps. And it was their way.
No, there's a bazillion. I mean, I don't know if there's a bazillion light map things, but there are. I don't want to say infinite, but there's a seemingly infinite number of Unreal Engine plugins.
Yeah, I believe that. You know, I've looked through the asset store before, or is it Unity that calls it the assets? Anyway, yeah. Like I know there's tons of stuff out there for like getting your game onto Steam or Workshop, like mod support, like plugins for, I guess the distinction I'm trying to make is, instead of adding extra functionality that's not in the engine, you're replacing very low level functionality that does ship with the engine. And that's what I was surprised that there are options for doing.
Yeah. So I think that the main reason the other light mass calc exists, let's see, it's Lu Shang's GPU light mass swarm. And it's or GPU light mass, and it's basically a port of the GPU light mass accelerator that'll run on 70 series cards, because by default it pretty much, the Unreal Engine one only works on 3080s or 2080s or 3080s, I think. And it's because of, I believe, memory limits. I can't remember.
I see.
So that's the one example. Unreal treats GPU light mass still as a beta thing. If you're working in an office with a bunch of people, you can run the Swarm controller. The CPU light mass calculator will distribute across all of the computers in your network, as long as you have the Swarm controller installed on them and running, which means it can go a little bit faster, but it still takes a long time. And it means that you have to leave those computers running if you want to take advantage of that.
Sure. I wonder how throughput limited that is.
Not very.
Networking those calculations, like I assume the actual amount of data that's going back and forth is pretty small. It's just the computation that is heavy.
Yeah. So the thing that I believe happens in the beginning is it breaks up the levels into chunks, and then that's the thing that's not super threaded or seems to be CPU bound or seems to limit itself to a small number of CPU threads. Then runs for a fairly long time, is breaking up the level into discrete chunks, and then it distributes those out using that Swarm client to the other machines on the network. And they're not big. It's just the math is complicated because it's basically bouncing a bazillion rays around the world. The difference is we don't have to buy a big SGI workstation or some Cray render or something to do it anymore. We can just run it on a bunch of desktop PCs with 30 cores each. And
those were the days.
And the nice thing is you can set the Swarm thing so it just eats like 2 cores, which most people won't even notice when they're using their computers. Yeah.
That's cool.
Now, the reason this benchmark is interesting, though, is if you're, let's say, an environment artist or a level designer or work in those spaces and you have to rebuild these levels frequently, you'll often, like if you're doing the good build for the shipping level when the game is ready to be, when you're ready to release the game or update a new level in the game or whatever, you'll do the good lighting calculations right before it ships, right? And that'll run for hours and it's time consuming. But if you're making like, say if you're changing the position of a box or a door or a tree or something, you'll run a preview version of those calcs more often than that because you want to see the shadow for the tree in the right place and make sure that it doesn't interfere with something else or whatever. And that can get fairly time consuming, and it kind of takes you out of work. Like if you have to do it during the day, you do it before you go away for lunch, or you do it at the end of the day because it's going to prevent you from doing anything for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I got kind of excited when you told me you were doing this because some months ago you were still working on the Anacrusis. This was not for this benchmark. It was for a shipping game at the time, but you sent me, it was around the time we were both building computers. You remember this?
Oh, yeah, it was when I was baking lights.
You just sent me unbidden. You sent me a screenshot of Task Manager with every single core on your 13900K pegged flatlined at 100%, which even doing like I've been experimenting with different AV1 software encoders recently. And even doing that stuff, like I haven't been able to get it to. I mean, it'll load each core pretty steadily, but you still see a bunch of spikes up and down. But this was the only thing, except maybe compiling like the Linux kernel or something, like some heavy software compilation,
baby.
So maybe you can get 7-zip to do it, but like I have not seen anything else besides that whatever Unreal calculations you were doing that so heavily completely pegs each core. Core all at once. Yeah, so this seems ripe for testing.
And just to be clear, that's even using the GPU light mass. It still pegs all the cores. Like it made the power cable coming into the computer get warm.
Wow,
which is probably good, right?
Interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what I've been working on. I'm curious what people think. I'd be curious to hear feedback. Like I said, this is coming from a place of wanting to mimic something that's a semi-realistic. It's a little bit weird because I think a lot of UE5 games are probably not shipping with a lot of pre-baked lights. They're probably doing global rendering, meaning that the light is all the main light for the world is dynamic. But like we're doing fog and other stuff that requires a little bit of pre-compute. So I think we'll have something that's at least representative of the performance you'll get, if not of the actual game.
Yeah, that's very cool. At first I was thinking to myself, like, how big is the audience for this kind of benchmark? It's limited to the people who are working game developers, of course, but you could see this, like, especially if it's something you can release, you could see this just becoming part of like some more standard benchmarking suites, like because it is a legitimate real world, very heavy and often very, very parallelized workload. I
think if I were releasing this for wider than this one particular project we're working on, I'd probably want to do I think I'd probably want to do something that's a little more representative of an actual game. Like I think there's probably games out there that would be willing to give us access to like a level from the game to do the same calculation on.
Yeah. That would be cool. Yeah, I guess, or to put it another way, what I was trying to say, it's like if you look at a lot of the benchmarking suites that are used in reviews for CPUs and graphics cards and stuff, like they're fairly robust, but in some cases it feels like they're kind of struggling to actually really load modern hardware, and so having another real world, something that's not just yet another synthetic benchmark, but something that is a real world workload that you can point at and say, here's how this actually works.
Absolutely true.
Is cool. I'm excited. Is that what form will that take ultimately? A video?
It'll be a video. It'll be part of a video about a different thing.
Okay.
I'm being very intentionally vague. I'm sorry.
All right, that's fine. I look forward to hearing more.
It's a thing about a thing, Brad.
Yes. All right. Shall we move on?
Yeah, let's hear about Matter and Thread. I'm sure this is good. Like, I feel like it seems like I haven't heard much in a little bit. Everything's going great, I bet.
Yeah, swimmingly. Hey, there's only one. You might have heard this one before. We need one standard to unify all the standards. 18 months later. Now there's only one standard, right?
No, it's the number of standards there were before plus one.
Yes, in plus one.
I don't think it's fair in this case. I think. Okay, well, go ahead. Tell me how it's going, Brad.
Okay. I drew a lot on a kind of year in review in December that The Verge ran by Jennifer Pattison Toohey, who apparently has kind of been pushing Matter and Thread to the limit. We talked at the top of the episode. To explain Matter and Thread again. We've covered it fairly extensive.
Yeah, I mean, but the idea is that Matter and Thread is a radio standard, Matter is an interoperability kind of communication standard, so that theoretically all of your devices, all of your smart home devices, colloquially known as the Internet of Shit, will talk to each other and work with each other. Now, this is a thing you could have done before if you had some intentionality with your purchases.
Oh yeah. That's or even if you didn't, actually, especially if you didn't, that's how I ended up with Home Assistant. Was I've got a couple smart plugs that I got because they advertised with us on a podcast, and then I've got some others because we bought a 3-pack on Amazon that was on sale, and then I've got yet a third vendor's plugs as a Christmas gift. You know what I mean? Like at some point, that's how I came to Home Assistant, was just like in it, like retroactively. I was like, I've got all these competing things. I wish they all just worked in one interface. So yes, you could. And maybe we'll continue to do this the old-fashioned way with something like Home Assistant rather than standardizing it at the radio and application level, like Matter promised.
I mean, just to be clear, I have Matter running on my Home Assistant box right now, and all of the Matter and Thread devices in the house, including the Apple TV and the smart plugs that I have, and the handful of other things that I don't actually use except for at Christmas time because they're for Christmas lights, are working off of the Home Assistant Thread radio using the Matter standard. Like, it's been pretty good for me.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair.
I've only used, like I said, a handful of things, and I don't like so the interesting thing about, is it Thread? I always get confused about which is which. Matter. The interesting thing about Matter is that they have the idea of the edge router thing, right? Where you
border routers.
Yeah. Where things that are plugged in around your house, like smart speakers and digital picture frames and your refrigerator, maybe, and made by Google and Apple and Samsung, all can like expand the mesh of your mesh network, right?
Yes. The theory is that you would never have to buy a dedicated controller or hub. Like it's that, like what I guess what SmartThings is, or like the Philips Hue hub, stuff like that, like a thing that is just a little lump of plastic that serves no other purpose than to unify all the actual client devices.
But that's also what Home Assistant is, right? Like that's what I did not, when they initially pitched this to people, that was not the thing I took from this. The thing I took from this was that all of the smart hubs would work together on the same protocol. So you wouldn't have to have okay. So I use Home Assistant to take all of the different disparate stuff in my house and glue it together into one application. And then I dole it back out from there to things like Google Home and Apple Siri and Alexa, if that was a thing that I used, so that I could access them from the different places that I want to do, like voice assistants.
Yes. My
understanding was that I shouldn't have to do that step with Matter, that all of the Matter devices should just be able to talk to each other. And like my Home Assistant would see HomeKit and Google Play and all the different Nest things, and my Nest things would see the HomeKit and the Google Play and all the different standards. And it seems like that's just not happening.
That is the promise. Every device is supposed to work with every vendor's ecosystem. And when we say ecosystem, we're talking Apple Home, Google Home, Alexa,
Samsung,
What is
Smart Things? Samsung.
Smart Things. Are there other big ones out there at this point?
Yeah, Philips Hue is one.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think Lutron has signed on, but Lutron has a hub with their Cassetta products.
Right.
There's a bunch of different places that this fires in. The good thing about this was there were kind of two. In reality, there were a bunch of ecosystems. In reality, there were two, right? Because there was like HomeKit, which had some specific hardware requirements, and then there was everything else, which was more or less hubs using Zigbee or Z-Wave or some variation of one of the two. And then Lutron had Cassetta, which is its own set of radios, which is quite nice, but is off on its own.
Yeah. Anyway, this piece that TUI did was basically kind of a year in review of spending 2023 testing Matter and Thread devices. And to be fair, it sounds like she's got so many things on her network. It's like far, far beyond what any average consumer would probably do.
Well, it's worth mentioning 2023, I think, is really the first year that Matter and Thread stuff started shipping in any kind of real quantity.
That's true. It's been almost a year since I was looking at some NanoLeaf Thread smart bulbs that I think were like kind of the first Thread smart bulbs to hit the market.
Yeah, the first thing I bought was an Eve. What was it? I said it was Eve Electric, maybe.
Yeah.
Eve Energy smart plug, and I bought it just to test the Matter implementation on my Home Assistant box.
Yes,
the Home Assistant Yellow.
I think actually, let me see if I can find it in the story. I think it's Eve and NanoLeaf are the two companies she mentioned. Kind of bet everything on Matter and Thread, and are now pivoting back to making Wi-Fi devices again, if that tells you how things are going.
Well, it's worth mentioning that the Eve box that I got started out as a Bluetooth device and then got Thread updates over time so that it was able to connect to the Thread border routers.
Yeah.
But okay, so it was a rough year. Is the TLDR.
Yes. I guess I just kind of will address some of the main points raised in the story, and we'll link this. There's also a couple of R's pieces that we read for this. Those will all be in the show notes. But just kind of going bullet point by bullet point of what Matter and Thread were supposed to deliver. Okay, so like the first one is you can use any company's device in any other company's ecosystem. That's the idea. Like if you're an Apple Home user primarily, but you end up with some devices that are made for Alexa or whatever, theoretically, those are still supposed to work in the ecosystem of your choice.
And that works, right?
Sort of, yes. It sounds like, I'm just going to quote from the story here. It sounds like basically at a baseline, yes, but the actual functionality that you're going to get is going to vary by which ecosystem in and what features that ecosystem supports.
But I mean, that's kind of how open standards work, right? Everybody supports which parts of it they want, and everybody else supports the parts of it that they don't support the parts that they don't want.
Yeah.
So like so is there, for example, here, I guess?
Yes, there is. I mean, you're not wrong, but also as a consumer, that's the last thing I want to worry about is, do I need to eyeball a table on the back of this thing to know if all of its features are supported in Home or what, Apple Home or whatever it is I like to use?
Okay. I mean, I will say this morning I got up and the power had gone off last night and all of the light bulbs were on in the house. And I had to open up the Wise app and go in and toggle on each light bulb on power off return to last state rather than full blast. Because at 3:00 in the morning when the power went off and all the lights turned on in the bedrooms, it wasn't great.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That sounds fun. Okay. Yes. Here's a quote talking about devices working in different ecosystems. If you connect your Philips Hue smart bulbs to Apple Home via Matter, you can't use Apple Home's adaptive lighting features. If you pair an Eve Energy smart plug with Amazon Alexa, you lose its energy monitoring feature. If you add GoV's Matter light strip to your smart home platform of choice, you can't play with any of its cool lighting effects. So it's like, all of these things are like able to connect at a basic level and have their basic functionality work, but like higher level stuff or anything that requires any kind of like vendor specific support is not working cross platform at all.
But okay, so I can use adaptive lighting with Philips Hue bulbs I have to do it from the Apple Home app. And I have one of those Eve Energy smart plugs, and in Home Assistant, I see the energy usage, and in the Eve app, I see the energy usage. But if I ask Google about the energy usage, the Google Home device isn't going to know what the hell I'm talking about because it doesn't understand that, right? I guess I don't see that as a problem. I see that as that's like saying, hey, Google added a bunch of proprietary shit to Chrome that Safari and Firefox aren't going to support.
Well, but I mean that analogy would hold if there were some global browser alliance that had promised all these browsers were going to be able to interoperate.
I mean, what's the W3C then?
Oh, geez. Well, that's a whole other episode.
Yeah.
Trust me, I get up to my elbows in enough half-baked tech to absolutely understand why the stuff wouldn't be working right at a high level. But again, I'm coming at this from the angle of this thing is supposed to take all the guesswork out of this process of buying stuff. Like the idea of this whole standard is you're supposed to just be able to buy devices and have them all work. And the second I have to start doing homework to actually figure out what that's going to mean in practice is the second that I'm just never going to touch this standard. And I think that's probably where I'm going to end up at the end of this episode.
I think we're in the trough of despair, man.
Yeah.
I think this is like, we've heard the promise. Everybody got all excited about it. It started coming out and it's not living up to the promise.
Yeah. I'll cop to having been fairly excited about what they were pitching for Matter and Thread a year and a half ago when we did that FOSSBot episode, and it does not seem to be playing out. Okay, let's move on to the next point. I mean, this one is more pretty flatly damning, I think. Matter has something called multi-admin mode, which I had not been aware of, but they defined it in the spec enough to give it a name.
Yeah.
If that tells you anything. And the idea there is basically it's kind of the inverse of what we were just talking about, where it's like you can use multiple products in any one ecosystem of your choice. In this case, you can use one product in multiple ecosystems. So you could have I guess the best use case example is like you like Apple stuff and you like to use the Apple Home interface, but your wife likes Alexa or Google Home. The idea is that the device would show up in all of those home hubs on, say, everybody's phone, and you could access the basic functionality of the device from any of those. Sounds like that absolutely just does not work.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. This one again, this feels like not being intentional. Like I get that normal people aren't intentional about computer stuff often, but all of this feels like, hey, you have to think about how this works and how this is going to work. Maybe I'm just so damaged from years of covering this stuff that I can't. I don't know. That's kind of how I feel. I'm kind of like, don't cut them too much slack. I mean, again, I get in practice why all of this stuff is such a huge mess. Also, my assumption is we're first year. Like, if I have one argument with this, one complaint with this standard, I would say that they pitched something that was way, 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 way optimistic for something that's going to have some really gnarly teething pains when you're talking about 5 enormous, worldwide global companies that all agreed to the standard because they think they can own it. And it doesn't surprise me that Philips made a thing that doesn't work with everybody.
Yeah. I mean, that seems to be the case, is that everybody kind of wants to do their own thing, even within a spec that says they should all be working together.
So I will say, when I moved the Eve thing from my HomeKit network into the Home Assistant network, which was a little bit of a process, I had to download I had to go to a setting on the app. I had to generate a new pairing image, print that out, take a picture of my phone from the Apple Home app. It was a weird process.
Yeah.
But I made the choice to pair everything with Home and let it with Home Assistant and let it propagate out to HomeKit and Google Home from there, rather than thinking I could add it to the Apple Home and have it get sucked into Home Assistant and Google Home from there.
Oh yeah. I would never do that, to be clear. As a Home Assistant user, I also would add everything through Home Assistant.
Yeah, I guess both the first 2 points are I don't think this is a problem. I think Home Assistant is the good implementation of all of these technologies.
Yeah,
probably.
I agree with you, but I also still think Home Assistant has gotten way more accessible than it used to be, but I still don't think it's within reach of the average consumer who doesn't want to think about any of this stuff.
Oh, it's definitely nerd shit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, extremely. Third point is about the Thread border routers that we were talking about, where basically your fridge or your light fixture can be a device that routes traffic from other clients instead of a dedicated box. Sounds like that is still a giant mess. She says that most of the devices on her network are still running through dedicated boxes, and that specifically, I'll just quote this: the dozen or so Thread border routers in my home have formed their own proprietary Thread networks based on their manufacturer and don't talk to each other.
Yeah, this is bad. Just to be clear, this seems like either ideally the app should look and say, oh, hey, there's 3 Thread networks here. Do any of these belong to you? Do you want to join one of the existing networks? Anytime you add something, so you end up with one Thread network instead of a bazillion Thread networks. There's probably political reasons they don't want to do that because everybody wants to own this network. But like the benefit of having a big giant mesh network with a bunch of border routers is that you have everything connected to the same network, so that when you add something new, it benefits from the breadth and width of the net mesh and doesn't get disconnected. And this is like both an onboarding and installation and setup failure, a communication failure. Like this sucks all the way around.
Yeah, for sure. Sounds like a giant mess. Also, I haven't mentioned so far, like some manufacturers have kind of backed away from this a little bit. Like Belkin, almost a year ago, I think, announced that they were stepping back from the whole thing and kind of
from
waiting.
Matter and Thread, or
yes.
I mean, it doesn't surprise me.
And other manufacturers who are participating are kind of trying to, it sounds like, carve out their own fiefdoms within it.
Well, but I mean, this is it's quite literally saying, hey, we're going to take the thing that makes this good and then just not do it.
Yeah. Yeah. That seems to be kind of how it's shaping up. She talks about the thing you were talking about with the onboarding. She says that the simple onboarding of you can use any app you want and just basically scan the Matter code on the device and it's just on, actually does generally work pretty well. Or when it works, it's quite elegant. But I think she gave the same example you did. You said your thing fell off the network and you had to get it back on, right?
Well, no, I wanted to switch from the Apple hub to the Home Assistant hub.
It was switching, I see.
Yeah, because just to be clear, sucking it from the Apple hub into the Home Assistant hub wasn't working particularly well, which meant that it wasn't accessible in things like Google or Alexa. So yeah, but I think my assumption, and this may be naive, but my assumption was that at least for this first generation, maybe 2 generations, probably you're going to have to use some proprietary app to do most of the configuration stuff for everything.
That's kind of exactly where she's at here. She gives an example about some TP-Link Tapos light switches.
Yeah.
That she could not get to connect to the network through Apple Home because they're TP-Link. And she says, I quickly defaulted to the Tapo app where they paired immediately. When I went back to add them to Apple Home and then Google Home through Matter, 2 of them dropped offline on both platforms, but continue to work fine in the Tapo app. So yes, it's still a lot of vendor siloing. And
so I have some of those Tapo switches that I use for like Christmas tree and Christmas lights around the house. And I had the same exact experience until I paired them with the Home Assistant Matter network, and then it was fine. So your mileage may vary, I guess.
Yeah. And then she talks about, you mentioned some of your devices have upgraded to Matter that used to be like what, Bluetooth?
They were Bluetooth and Zigbee, or Bluetooth and HomeKit, I think is actually what they were, which is like a Zigbee fork, I think. I can't remember how Apple does that.
She says, for example, her Philips Hue hub has gotten less reliable since she did the upgrade to Matter support for it.
This is the thing. The problem with this kind of this thing is everybody is using, it's up to everybody's implementations, right? Yeah. And if your hub has a bad implementation, if your endpoint has a bad implementation, if you're like, I'm bummed.
Yeah, it is a bummer. I was hopeful about this stuff. Although again, because we're deep into the Home Assistant rabbit hole, it kind of covers that use case.
Well, it covers that use case, but it also, like, I have Zigbee, Z-Wave, and HomeKit. No, I don't have HomeKit. I have Zigbee, Z-Wave, and Matter and Thread all running on the same box. It's in the center of my house. It's powered with power over Ethernet. It's relatively easy to access and maintain. But mostly I just let it sit there and I update it every couple of months when it gets an update. And then I don't think about it too much. And in that regard, it works exactly the way I want for this kind of stuff. I just don't want to think about. I just want it to work.
Yeah. I mean, the one aspect of this that is not supported by the Home Assistant use case is the onboarding, the initial setup for a new device.
Yeah.
Because you're still, even with Home Assistant, you're still, well, unless it's Matter. It sounds like if it's Matter, you can add it straight into Home Assistant, right? Like you mentioned.
But it has to be Matter out of the box. And right. but still, I think I would use the official app to set up the pairing would be my guess.
That's the thing I cannot stand. Honestly, that's the thing. That's the aspect of all of this that annoys me the most, is just having like half a dozen different smart vendor apps on my phone and having to get a new one every time I buy somebody else's product.
Oh, see, I just put them all in a folder and then never think about them again.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't have to make an account in one, it's way better, but some of them.
Well, okay. So I don't buy anything I don't buy anything that's cloud mediated. So I never have to do an account.
Yeah. I mean, well, generally once you do the setup, you might want to go check and make sure.
I'm going to look at Wise. I think Wise might have an account. I can't remember, but those bulbs were pretty good and they were really cheap.
I'm pretty sure TP-Link Casa has an account. I think the Belkin Wemo stuff does as well. It's not routing like control signals for the devices through the cloud. It's
Yeah.
But you do have to make an account just to get past the app onboarding to let it actually pair something.
I have a Casa account. I have a Wise account.
Yep. All that stuff sucks.
It doesn't bother me. I try not to worry about it too much. The thing that I found, I was early on Zigbee and bought a whole bunch of Cree Zigbee bulbs, which were great. When they started conking out about 10, 12 years in, I replaced them all with Wi-Fi bulbs because the Wi-Fi turns out I've spent a fair amount of money and time building a really robust Wi-Fi network that covers the entirety of my house. And it was infinitely more reliable than Zigbee radios in what are often metallic fixtures that would block Zigbee radio signals. And as a result, I would have bad radio drop off on the far side of the house and like light bulbs would just stop working. So once I switched to Wi-Fi, I haven't had that problem.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I guess your average house is just inherently going to have way better Wi-Fi coverage than, it's not like you're going to put multiple Zigbee radios all over the house, right? Or it is a mesh network, so I guess.
I mean, theoretically, each of those bulbs should have been a node on the mesh. Right. In reality, there's a limited number of hops you can do with Zigbee. Zigbee is, I think, better than Z-Wave. Z-Wave is like 4 hops or something ridiculous. But in practical terms, when somebody would walk across or sit in a different place in the house, the light at the far corner of my daughter's bedroom, which was as far from the Zigbee radios you would get, would just stop responding.
Great.
And it happened often enough. And then because of the age of those bulbs, probably when it stopped responding or lost signal in a frequent enough period of time, it would eventually need a reset to come back on. And I got tired of doing the leave it on for a second, leave it off for 2 seconds, leave it on for a second, leave it off for 2 seconds, leave it on for a second, leave it off for 2 seconds thing 5 times to reset the bulb. So I just replaced them all with Wise bulbs.
Yeah, that makes sense. All of that is good to hear. I did talk to some people on the Discord and the home automation channel, and there are definitely some fans of Zigbee in there.
I think Zigbee is generally pretty good.
I don't know, man. Maybe I should just stick with Wi-Fi stuff at this point.
Here's the thing is, if I had a bunch, if you're in a situation where you can put Zigbee switches in your wall that serve as mesh nodes and as mesh routers, I think it's pretty solid. The wiring in my house is old, so all of our wires are two pole wires. There's not a neutral wire, so that means I couldn't run any modern switches basically in this house. So there's a Lutron Cassetta makes some 2-wire switches. They're not Zigbee. There were some GE Z-Wave switches that were two pole wires that were a little scary. They don't make those anymore. They're really hard to find. They got really expensive after they stopped making them. That's pretty much it. So the option for Zigbee mesh nodes was big giant wall warts that dangle out of the wall to plug appliances or other things in. And I ended up just putting a couple of those in like disused plugs in corners of the house so that I would get a solid enough network so that my daughter's light would turn off at bedtime.
Literally just using them as repeaters. You don't even have anything in them.
Straight up just repeaters. Yeah.
Huh.
So I was just burning electricity to make the radio better. And like I said, the Wi-Fi network's real good. So
yeah. Do you have any concern about, I don't know how well you can speak to this, like if you reach a certain critical mass of Internet of Shit devices on your Wi-Fi, like at some point your Wi-Fi network is just, the Wi-Fi radio, I should say, is fairly crowded.
Yeah, the bulbs are low traffic enough that I don't really care.
That's fair. Like
I can open up my Unify console and tell you how much traffic the average bulb does, but it wasn't when I looked, it was not very much.
It's probably not a lot. I mean, there's got to be some kind of like fairly regular keep alive kind of signal going back and forth, though, right?
But I think it's like I don't think it was very many packets. Hold on.
Probably not. Maybe I'm overthinking that aspect of it, or maybe that was a concern that was raised on the Discord, was not cluttering up your Wi-Fi network with this stuff.
Here, the one problem I will tell you is I'm getting close to the number of. I'm going to have to move into a second subnet before too long.
Interesting. Wow.
I'm going to be more than 200. Well,
what's the size of your address range?
I mean, there's
talking 8-bit subnet mask.
It's 100. Yes, 180.
What is that? 255 addresses?
Yeah, but I have some fixed IPs reserved at the front for reasons that I don't remember. I don't remember what they are now, so I'm afraid to mess with them.
Maybe you can just release them and see what happens. If nothing breaks, you're fine. I also have.
Okay, so here's a Wise bulb. I can tell you how much data it uses now. It has in the last 16 hours and 1 minute. It's done. I'm trying to find where 1,250 packets for 101 kilobytes down and 4,490 packets for 270 kilobytes up.
That's not a lot of data. I mean, I wonder if it's more the interval that it's actually touching the radio rather than the amount of data that it's sending that matters there. But either way, that doesn't seem like much. Yeah,
it's not much. The bigger problem is the congestion on the subnet. So yeah, you could put all this stuff in a separate VLAN if you wanted.
I mean, again, like we mentioned at the top, you probably should do that anyway. I've been meaning to do that for ages and just haven't done the homework.
So I generally just buy stuff from reputable places. I don't buy a bunch of like sketchy Temu or AliExpress Wi-Fi devices, Internet of Things devices.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there is a lot of this stuff has firmware that's released and then is never looked at again, and security vulnerabilities aren't patched or whatever. So it is a concern.
Yes. Everything I've got it's all iDevices, Belkin, and TP-Link, except for I've got one kind of no name. It is a home. Well, it's HomeKit enabled. It's iHaper, I think is how
it has the security chip. Then it's probably fine.
HAPER, which is now defunct. Like you can't even find anything about that company. I've had it for like 5 years. It's like kind of a no-name light strip, LED light strip, but it is HomeKit enabled, unless they found some way to spoof the HomeKit required HomeKit hardware.
There you go.
I assume it is legit enough that it's probably fine. But you're right. I think most of the stuff I have is pretty reputable as well. I have thought about replacing that light strip with the, you can just buy the kind of light strip by the foot, LED strips by the foot.
Yeah, I love those.
And cut those and get like the little ESP32 controllers. I have thought about getting way into that stuff, but at any rate,
I think we just had an earthquake.
Whoa, I didn't feel anything. Live earthquake reacts. What's your go-to geological source?
Usually
was there just an earthquake?
I go to USGS. First I post on Blue Sky, was there just an earthquake?
That was my method for years, was run to Twitter and see if everybody's going earthquake.
Look, I want my last thing that happened to be me asking if there was an earthquake. It sounded like a bus driving by and there was a little bit of a rumble.
Oh,
but I didn't feel a whole lot. It could have also just been a bus driving by. You use GS?
Yes. Where is San Juan Bautista?
That's pretty far south. It's like by Half Moon Bay. That's closer to me than you, though.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, that is. It's down past Santa Cruz.
7:14 UTC.
Oh, I didn't look at the time.
Oh, it's 10 minutes ago. No, that's not it.
Okay. Well, who knows?
It might. We're still in the window for it to be on, though. It wouldn't have hit yet. It usually takes a minute or two.
Stay tuned as Earthquake Watch continues. What were we talking about? Those little light strips. The little. There's a whole scene around like open source firmware for those little ESP controllers.
There's so much fun stuff you can like. If I next when I move into the next house, I'm going to run those all under the edge of the kitchen cabinets.
Yes,
because I want more lighting. I'm old and my eyes are bad, and I want lighting there.
Great,
yeah,
to be able to, especially if you set that up on like motion sensors, or even if it was just on your phone or standard stuff, but like. Having like nice out of the way underlighting where you're not actually staring at the bulb, but you still get the good kind of ambient bounce light off under cabinets and stuff.
Have you seen the new hotness on Internet of Shit stuff?
No.
Presence sensors that use Wi-Fi radios signals as radar.
Oh,
so they can tell like where you are in the house, where you are in the room.
Oh, wow.
Whether you're like laying on the sofa, whether you're sitting up, whether you're awake or asleep.
Huh.
So it's a little creepy.
Definitely put that on its own VLAN.
Well, yeah, because it just needs ambient Wi-Fi. It's not actually using data. It's just using the radar, the radio as radar. It's basically replacing motion sensors. They're just little like puck tape things you put in the ceiling.
That's kind of cool.
It's the thing I've always wanted. Because they're more sensitive and they're like sensitive enough to detect moving a mouse or something. Because often I'll be in my office and the motion sensor isn't sensitive enough to detect that, so it just turns off the lights in here after a while. And I'm thinking I'm going to put some in the house.
Yes, I've never really been big on setting up automations against motion sensing because I just feel like there are way too many edge cases where I wouldn't want the thing.
It's not great.
Like every single time you open a door, having a light come on, like I don't think I want that actually.
So I have a door sensor on our back door. Every time you go out the back door and it's after dark, the back porch light turns on, which is awesome.
Yeah,
There's also a
fine.
physical switch right next to there. So if I don't want that to happen, you just flip the switch off before you go out.
Yeah, that's good.
The other one was when the kiddo was young, having a motion sensor in the master bedroom where we take her out of the bath to dry her off and get her dressed for bed was incredibly useful, because you have a baby and a bunch of shit in your hands and you just walk in and the light turns on. That was really nice.
Yeah, there are use cases.
But that's what I got.
Yeah. Home automation. It's still in progress.
So here's the thing. We're at the end of basically the first year or 18 months that the stuff has been shipping.
Yeah, I should say the write up from 2E on The Verge, and also the Kevin Purdy on Ars Technica. I read some stuff from him. Like, both of them conclude by saying, yes, this stuff is all a giant mess, but like, we're still hopeful that this is going to be the standard of the future. Yeah, in X number of years.
The thing I will say is it took a good 10 years before Z-Wave was usable at all. Like, it launched. It was terrible when it was new. Zigbee took a similar length of time. Like, right. Yeah. It's the interoperability adds a level of complexity that goes far beyond what Zigbee and Z-Wave were able to do. I think like the initial bug that there are bugs with complicated things like the mesh, the devices connected to the mesh spreading out from one vendor to another vendor's networks and vice versa. Doesn't surprise me. I think it's really, really unfortunate that the hubs that the default for every single edge router isn't, hey, is there a thread network here that I need to connect to? Maybe there is, and then connect to that rather than just setting up their own stake in the ground.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Like that is a dopey decision that should be rectified.
Yes. I will say, though, the danger of all these even if these problems are understandable at this early date, the danger is creating this kind of retroactive chicken and egg situation where, because it's a mess early on, nobody adopts it, nobody buys in, and the manufacturers get scared and they all back off from it.
Not worried about that at all.
Oh,
nope. They've sold enough stuff already. We're fine. People are going to be, because here's the thing. It's in the manufacturer's interest for this to work. Because if it doesn't, like, if there's competition and there's room for other devices on your networks, then there's opportunity for Apple to eat into Google and Samsung's share, and Google and Samsung to eat into Apple's share. If this doesn't work, then that opportunity goes away, and there's just going to be two silos forever and ever. And there's never an opportunity for Google to capture iPhone users and Apple to capture Google users, and the silos get deeper and deeper. So they're going to continue pushing it, and they're right to. It's going to take a while. It's going to suck for a little bit. It'll be fine eventually.
Yeah,
read reviews.
So it just leaves you in a weird limbo right now if you're looking for new stuff and not sure what to get. I
mean, what I will say is a much smaller sample size than the people that we talked about who wrote about this have. But with the handful of devices I've used, the Home Assistant implementation has been pretty good, and it just works with the other stuff automatically. So, your mileage may vary, I guess.
That's promising.
Yeah. And that's as good a place as any, I think, to wrap it up this week. Please let us know what you think about the two-fer. If you do, we will do these more. If you like these, we'll do them more often. I think it's nice to be able to talk about things that maybe couldn't sustain a whole episode on their own.
I agree.
But we will be back next week with more of Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. As always, this podcast is brought to you by the listeners.
It's true.
Thank you, listeners.
You did this.
Yeah, this is your fault. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. And it's especially true of our patrons. So we don't take ads. The only way we make money on the show is by the generous contributions of almost 3,000 patrons. So thank you so much, patrons. And as always, if you would like to find out how to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/techpod, where for $5 a month, you get access to the fabulous TechPod Discord, which is full of beautiful nerds, even though they're advocating the use of Z-Wave, which I strongly disagree with.
To be fair, I think it was like one person who was in on Z-Wave. Most everybody was into Zigbee.
I'm not going to pick on the Zigbee or the Z-Wave people, but I'm just going to say, like, we sometimes disagree, but I still love each and every person in there. And for, like I said, $5 a month, you get access to that. You get the patron exclusive episode where we've been threatening to talk about Helldivers, but haven't yet.
Oh my God, this flying enemy thing is so amazing.
I haven't seen the flying enemies yet.
I haven't seen the enemies either, but the way they are handling it is.
You mean the fact that we're forcing the bugs to evolve by killing them more efficiently with the gas?
It's this weird plausible deniability stealth update thing they're doing, where they snuck them into the game without telling anybody, and then when people started finding them, and it seems like they're finding them sporadically, like the spawn rate is quite low, and then the developers are basically denying that they're in the game.
I don't know how I feel about the developers gaslighting players.
Considering
it fits with the brand, it fits with the game.
Considering the political milieu that the game is lampooning, I think propaganda that turns truth on its head probably makes perfect sense.
Did you see the propaganda on YouTube where somebody data miners pulled an upcoming video that explained spoilers, I guess, for Helldivers 2 if you care. Come back in 45 seconds. The bugs, the gassing that we're doing of the bugs right now is causing them to evolve.
What?
So we're going to get new varieties of bugs that are super bugs because of the gassing that's happening across all the planets.
They seem backfired. They seem like they went into this game with some ideas.
This game has most ideas per gigabyte I've seen in a video game in a long time.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Anyway, thanks to all of our patrons. You can go to patreon.com/checkpod. Like I said, $5 a month. We appreciate everyone's support, but we especially appreciate our executive producers, tier patrons, including Paddle Creek Games, makers of Fractured Veil, which is out now. You should check it out. I played it. It's pretty good.
Oh, cool.
Andrew Slosky, Jordan Lippett, tech.bunnycrimes.com. That's a URL now. Just Wedge, Joel Krauska, Twinkle Twinkie, David Allen, James Kamek, and Pantheon, makers of the HS3 high-speed 3D printer.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that URL again?
Tech.bunnycrimes.com.
Okay. It's pretty good.
It's pretty good. Did you go to it?
Maybe.
I'm going now. That'll do it for us this week. Thanks, everybody, for your support, and we will see you all next week.